From the Chicago Sun-Times newsroom, I'm Natasha Korecki, and this is Off Message, our weekly political talk show. Joining us today is a very special guest, Tim Novak, who's our Watchdog reporter, another Watchdog reporter, and an early and often columnist, Dan Mihalopoulos, and our Springfield bureau chief, Dave McKinney. We saw a very historic event last week, seeing R.J. Vanecko plead guilty. Tim, early on, there were a lot of naysayers when you were writing these stories. But you always seemed to be able to tune all of that out and stay focused. And what sort of drove you through that time, especially early on when people were doubting if this was even a story?
Well, it was just so obvious that I really never understood the doubters. It was just like, how can you not see this? It was so obvious that Vanecko did it because the way they handled it. If it was somebody else, they wouldn't have handled it that way. We also had Mrs. Koschman, who was completely devastated and distraught by her son's death and the treatment that she got from the Chicago Police Department and the city government and as a whole. They just cast her aside, told her son got what he deserved and she should go home and don't worry about it.
Was that early on one of the things that really motivated you to find out what really happened that night?
No, the thing that motivated me the most was when Mrs. Koschman told me back in 2008 that whoever did this to her son had run away, which didn't make any sense since the police department were blaming her son for it. So it's like, if it was his fault, why did the guy run away? So
it always kind of stayed in the back of your mind?
Yes, that somebody fled, and it was a member of the mayor's family that fled.
This report comes out this week. Does Mayor Daley get a clean bill of health?
Not at all. There's no evidence that Mayor Daley made a phone call or sent an email. He doesn't even know how to do that. But there's never going to be anything like that. This was handled in City Hall. The mayor's office was intimately involved in the reinvestigation of David Koschman's death. They kept apprised of it. They were told what was going on, when it was going to be closed. They got clearance from the police department and the state's attorney's office to release the reports while we were working on this. So they were told right away that I was asking about this case involving the mayor's nephew.
There wasn't enough right now, Webb said, to bring charges. And he said, as I understand it, there was at least half a dozen people in the police department who should receive some kind of additional legal scrutiny, but he thought the statute had run on it. Do you think that there are further ramifications ahead for these people?
Well, those 6 officers, I think, remain under investigation by Joe Ferguson, the Inspector General, who has been a part of this case since the day our first story ran 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. Now that R.J. Vanecko has gone into court and of his own free will admitted that he did this, everything prior to this was obstruction of justice by the police department, by City Hall. They were... Because
there's now a conviction.
He admitted he did this. They were saying he didn't do it, or he did it in self-defense. He did not say that when he pled guilty. He admitted this was involuntary manslaughter. So all these other things were done they were obstructing justice. Now, whether anybody can be charged with that or not is another story.
So, Tim, your name shows up 42 times in the special report, as I understand it.
I think it's 45, but who's counting?
And after years of reporting on this case and being so intimately involved and being the reason for R.J. Vanecko to be in court that day, I understand that you ended up having an interaction with him the day that he went to Rolling Meadows Courthouse and pleaded guilty. Can you tell us about that?
As Mr. Vanecko was leaving the courthouse, being chased by everyone asking him if he had any comment, I thought that was the wrong question to ask him. So I asked him a question I knew he wouldn't answer, but I asked him why he ran away.
Wow. Did he say anything?
No, but I'm sure he thought about it.
Excellent. Well, with that, we will shift gears a little bit here. Dan Rutherford, who has leveled some explosive allegations.
I know. We've seen another person enter the race with millions and millions and millions of dollars who is specifically noted to say he's going to destroy his opponents. Nice try.
There's some explosive allegations that are percolating up against him.
Oh, let me tell you what, I'd love to be able to sit here right now and look every one of those cameras in the eye and each one of you reporters, and you put it on tape, exactly what was alleged against me, exactly the time frame that it was alleged against me, and exactly the lack of information about it, but I can't.
Dan, you were at the news conference. What was your initial impression of how he was laying out his case for this?
My impression of it was one of the most bizarre spectacles we've ever seen in Illinois politics. I mean, everybody comes to this press conference, probably more people than have been at any event in his campaign. Up until this point, it's pretty much Bruce Rauner and the 3 relatively poor dwarfs in this race. distinguishes himself, but I don't think it's in a way that has really propelled his campaign any closer to victory. Comes out and says that he has an accuser, that he's going to investigate it, but that it's all bunk. And by the way, I can't tell you what the allegations are or who is accusing me. Clearly designed to get ahead of perhaps the accusations being made before he can rebut them. He seemed galvanized in his campaign because he really had his greatest passion not in defending himself there, but in attacking Bruce Rauner.
She's been paid by Bruce Rauner. I got to tell you what, Illinois politics is hardball. It's tough in this state. This is not a sport for the faint of heart.
Dave, galvanized in his campaign, is that your impression of how his campaign is coming out looking?
No, I mean, I think this is a textbook study in how not to respond to an allegation against somebody. He subjected himself really to ridicule. You know, how is it that you can get up and deny something and not really ever say what it is you did or you're accused of doing?
I can't wait to be able to have an eyeball discussion with you about the accuser, about the charges, and the absolute fallacy of it.
You know, we don't know if somebody's going to accuse Dan Rutherford of, you know, being an arsonist or being a shoplifter or what, you know? And so I just think it was a disaster for him. Here we had probably the clear number 2 candidate in this race for Republican nomination. At the end of the day, I don't know if he's going to be in that role much longer. I think he's really hurt himself. I don't know if it's fatal yet, but it's getting close to that point.
Dan Rutherford comes out and he is the one who outs these allegations. We've talked a little bit to this employee who's asked so far to be anonymous, but is promising to file a lawsuit. If that lawsuit does not come, do you think this goes away for Rutherford or quiets down?
No, I don't see it actually going away until we have more information about it one way and the other. We really don't have enough to say whether it's credible, but it's out there and he put it out there.
We didn't hear any voices rising up in Rutherford's defense here. You know, I mean, no allies in the General Assembly, no political supporters, no one saying, you know, agreeing with Dan's point that he's been wronged here in some way. You know, he really is isolated on this.
Well, let's not forget the quotes of the week. I'll start off since we're just talking about Rutherford. We did a story earlier this week questioning his many trips overseas. At one point in the reporting for that story, I asked Rutherford, you know, what would he say to people in Illinois who think, isn't your time better served in Illinois than overseas? And he said, doing what? Tim, I hear you have something for us.
I'll quote retired Lieutenant Richard Rybicki, who was involved in the original Koschman investigation, and said within days they learned that the mayor's nephew was involved, and the quote is, "Holy crap, it's the mayor's nephew."
Dan?
Well, there are so many great quotes in the Webb report, but I leave that to the Alpha Watchdog entirely, and I'll go with Steve Brown, spokesman for House Speaker Mike Madigan, when asked why the Speaker is sending one of his operatives to help indicted State Rep Derek Smith in his re-election campaign, said to me, "We support incumbents." So the moral of the story is, as long as you're Madigan's guy, you press the right button down there in Springfield and you have not yet been convicted, then you're good to go for the primary.
Yeah, and how dare you ask about it. And Dave, what do you have for us from Springfield?
I guess we'll give Rutherford the last say of the thing here. There's absolutely no truth to the allegations, no factual support or merit. To what? That's what I wonder. To what?
Well, thank you to our panel, and thank you for joining us. We will see you next week on Off.